The night Alara Quinn arrived at Iron Ridge Ranch, she was 3 days away from dying. Not from hunger, though her stomach had forgotten what food tasted like. Not from exhaustion, though her boots were held together with stolen wire. She was dying because Lucien Voss had finally picked up her trail, and men like him didn't stop until they owned what they came for. When she saw that broken fence in the storm, she had two choices: keep running until her legs gave out, or fix something for the first time in her worthless life. She chose wrong, or maybe she chose right. Either way, everything that followed started with a fence she should have ignored. If you want to see how a starving drifter survives a man who treats women like property, stay until the end. And hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The storm hit Iron Ridge just after sundown, the kind that turned the prairie into a drowning pool and made even experienced riders pull their horses off the trail. Lightning cracked across the sky in jagged white scars, and thunder rolled so deep it felt like the earth was splitting open beneath the grass. Alara Quinn stumbled through it like a ghost no one wanted to bury. Her clothes were rags held together by dirt and desperation. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones pressing against skin that hadn't seen a decent meal in weeks. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles past her shoulders, and her eyes, gray as winter smoke, had the hollow look of someone who'd stopped expecting kindness a long time ago. She wasn't sure where she was anymore. Wyoming territory, maybe? Or Montana. The towns all blurred together after a while, just collections of buildings where people stared at her like she was something diseased. She'd been walking for months, ever since she'd slipped out of a locked room in a St. Louis mansion and disappeared into the night with nothing but the clothes she wore and a stolen knife she'd never learned to use. Lucien Voss would be looking for her. Men like him always looked, and when they found what they were hunting, they didn't let it go a second time. The rain came down in sheets, cold and vicious, soaking through her threadbare coat until she was shivering so hard her teeth clattered. She could barely see 10 feet ahead, just the vague shapes of fence posts and the dark outline of distant buildings that might have been a ranch or might have been a mirage her dying brain had invented. Then she saw it. A section of fence split clean through where lightning had struck a post. The wire hung loose, whipping in the wind, and beyond it she could see horses, big, expensive-looking animals, shifting nervously in the storm. If that fence stayed broken, those horses would bolt. And out here, a stampede in a storm meant dead animals, lost money, and ruined livelihoods. Alara stood there in the rain, staring at that fence. She should have kept walking, should have disappeared into the storm and let someone else deal with problems that weren't hers. That's what smart people did. They kept their heads down and survived. But something in her chest, some stupid, stubborn part she hadn't managed to kill yet, wouldn't let her move. She approached the fence slowly, her hands numb and clumsy. The wire was heavy, the kind ranchers used for horses worth more than most people's lives. She grabbed the loose end and started working, her fingers slipping on the wet metal, her breath coming in short gasps as exhaustion and hunger made her vision swim. It took longer than it should have. Her hands were shaking too badly, and she had to stop twice to keep from passing out. But eventually, she got the wire twisted back together. Not pretty, not professional, but solid enough to hold until someone who knew what they were doing could fix it properly. She was tightening the final twist when she heard the voice. "The hell are you doing?" Alara spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. A man stood 20 feet away, rain pouring off the brim of his hat. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from years of hard labor. His coat was good quality, his boots expensive, and everything about the way he stood screamed authority. But it was his face that made her breath catch. Hard. Brutal. The kind of face that didn't smile because it had forgotten how. His jaw was set like carved stone, his eyes dark and unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, pale against tanned skin, and his mouth was pressed into a thin line that suggested he didn't waste time on pleasantries. This was a man who got what he wanted, when he wanted it, and didn't care who got hurt in the process. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low and rough as gravel. "What are you doing on my land?" Alara's throat felt like sandpaper. "The fence. It was broken. The horses. I can see the damn fence." He took a step closer, and she instinctively backed up. "I asked what you're doing here." She didn't have a good answer. Didn't have any answer that wouldn't make her sound crazy or dangerous or like exactly the kind of person ranchers ran off their property with shotguns. I was passing through, she said, hating how weak her voice sounded. I saw the break. You thought you'd fix my fence. His tone made it sound like an accusation. Out of the goodness of your heart. I thought your horses would run. And you give a damn about my horses because... Alara's jaw tightened. She was cold, she was starving, and she was so tired she could barely stand. She didn't have the energy for whatever game this man was playing. Forget it, she said, turning to leave. Fix it yourself. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. Hold on. She didn't want to stop. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to disappear into the storm before he decided she was a threat or a thief or something worse. But her legs wouldn't carry her much farther, and she knew it. She turned back slowly. The man was studying her now, his expression unreadable. His eyes moved over her face, her soaked clothes, the way she swayed slightly on her feet like a tree about to fall. You're half dead, he said flatly. I'm fine. You're a liar. He tilted his head slightly. When's the last time you ate? Alara didn't answer. When's the last time you slept somewhere that wasn't the ground? Still nothing. The man exhaled slowly, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Not sympathy exactly, but something close to recognition. Like he'd seen this before and hadn't liked it then either. Come on, he said finally, turning toward the distant buildings. Alara didn't move. Come where? The house. You want to die out here in the rain? That's your business. But if you're going to collapse on my land, I'd rather it happen somewhere I don't have to drag your body out of the mud. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't even particularly polite. But it was shelter, and right now that was more than she'd had in weeks. She followed him. Kitty's turn. Thanks. The ranch house was enormous. 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and thick glass windows that glowed with lamplight. Outbuildings stretched in every direction, barns, stables, bunkhouses, all of them built with the kind of precision that spoke to serious money and serious pride. This wasn't some struggling homestead. This was an empire. The man led her up the porch steps and through the front door without a word. Inside, the house was warm and dry, furnished with heavy wooden furniture that looked like it had been built to survive a war. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace big enough to roast a whole pig, and the smell of coffee and tobacco hung in the air. A woman appeared from a side room, older, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the sharp eyes of someone who didn't miss much. Cade, she said, her gaze sliding to Alara. Who's this? Found her fixing the north fence, the man, Cade, said. Get her some food and a blanket before she dies on my floor. The woman's expression softened slightly. She hurt? She's starving. The woman nodded and disappeared back through the doorway. Cade pulled off his hat and coat, revealing dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples, and a build that was all muscle and hard edges. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. Alara didn't argue. Her legs gave out the moment she reached the chair, and she sank into it with a shudder of relief so intense it almost hurt. Cade stood by the fire, watching her with those unreadable dark eyes. You got a name? Alara. Alara what? She hesitated. Giving a last name meant leaving a trail. Leaving a trail meant Lucian could follow it. Just Alara. Cade's mouth tightened, but he didn't push. I'm Cade Mercer. This is Iron Ridge Ranch. You're on my land, which means you follow my rules. Understood? She nodded. Good. He crossed his arms. You steal from me, you're gone. You cause trouble with my men, you're gone. You bring any kind of danger to this ranch, you're gone before you can blink. Clear? Clear. The older woman returned with a plate of bread, cheese, and cold meat, along with a thick wool blanket. She set it on the table beside Alara with a gentleness that didn't match the hardness in Cade's voice. Eat slow, she said quietly. Your stomach won't handle much at once. Alara wanted to devour everything on that plate in 3 bites, but she forced herself to take small pieces, chewing slowly, letting her body remember what food tasted like. It was the best thing she'd eaten in months, and it took everything she had not to cry. Cade watched her eat in silence. When she finally set the plate down, still half full because her stomach couldn't hold more, he spoke again. You got somewhere to go? Alara shook her head. Family? Friends? No. Running from someone? Her throat closed up. She didn't answer. Cade studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thought so. He turned toward the fire, his broad shoulders blocking most of the light. I'll give you a choice. You can stay here tonight, get some rest, and leave in the morning with enough food to get you to the next town. Or you can stay and work. Alara's pulse quickened. Work? You fixed that fence in the middle of a storm when you could barely stand. That tells me you're either stupid or desperate, and I'm guessing it's the second one. He glanced back at her. I need someone who knows their way around horses. You ever worked with animals? She thought of the years before Lucian, back when she was just a poor girl working at a traveling horse trader's camp, learning to calm spooked animals and read their moods because her life depended on it. Yes, she said quietly. Good with them? Good enough. Cade turned fully now, his expression still hard but with something calculating behind it. Stay for a week. Work with the horses. If you're as good as I think you might be, I'll keep you on. If you're not, you leave with pay and no hard feelings. It was a better offer than she had any right to expect, but accepting meant staying in one place. Staying in one place meant leaving tracks, and leaving tracks meant, He won't find you here, Cade said suddenly, as if reading her mind. Whoever he is. This ranch is 3 days from the nearest town, and my men don't talk to strangers. You keep your head down and do your job. No one's going to know you exist. Alara stared at him. Why? Why what? Why help me? Cade's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he shrugged, the movement stiff and uncomfortable. Because someone should have helped my wife when she needed it, he said flatly. And they didn't. Before Alara could respond, he turned and walked toward the door. Martha will show you where to sleep. Work starts at dawn. And then he was gone, leaving her alone by the fire with more questions than answers and the faint, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place to stop running. Dawn came too soon and too bright. Alara woke in a small room off the back of the house, clean, simple, with a bed that was softer than anything she'd touched in months. For the first few seconds, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, the fence, the hard-faced man who'd offered her work instead of pity. She sat up slowly, her body aching from exhaustion and malnutrition. Her clothes were still damp and filthy, and she felt like something dragged through hell backward. But she was alive. And that was more than she'd expected a week ago. Martha, the older woman from last night, knocked softly before pushing the door open. She carried a bundle of clothes under one arm and a stern expression that probably scared half the ranch hands. These should fit, she said, setting the clothes on the bed. They belong to Cade's wife. She's been gone 4 years now, and he doesn't need 'em cluttering up the house. Alara touched the fabric carefully. The shirt was simple cotton, worn but clean. The trousers were sturdy canvas, the kind made for work, not appearances. Thank you, she said quietly. Martha nodded. Breakfast is in the kitchen. You eat fast, then get yourself to the main barn. Cade's already working, and he doesn't tolerate lateness. She left without another word. Alara dressed quickly, surprised by how well the clothes fit. Cade's wife must have been built like her, lean and tall, with narrow hips and broad shoulders. She tried not to think too hard about why that made her chest feel tight. The kitchen was bustling with activity when she arrived. Men sat at a long wooden table, shoveling down eggs and bacon with the single-minded focus of people who knew they had a long day ahead. A few glanced at her when she walked in, but most ignored her completely. She ate standing up, more bread, some scrambled eggs, coffee so strong it tasted like dirt, and then headed for the main barn. The building was massive, with high ceilings and rows of stalls that stretched back into shadow. Horses shifted and snorted in the dim light, their eyes gleaming as she passed. The smell of hay and manure and oiled leather filled the air, familiar and strangely comforting. Cade stood near the center of the barn, talking to a younger man with sandy hair and a nervous expression. When he saw Alara, he dismissed the other man with a jerk of his head and turned to face her. "You're late," he said. "I'm 5 minutes early." "Should have been 10. He gestured toward the far end of the barn. "The black stallion in the corner stall, name's Hades. He's been here 3 months and hasn't let anyone touch him. Gets worse every day. If I can't break him soon, I'll have to put him down." Alara walked toward the stall slowly. The horse inside was enormous, 17 hands at least, with a coat so black it looked like polished onyx. His ears were pinned flat against his skull, and his eyes rolled white with fear and fury. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Previous owner beat him half to death trying to break his spirit." Cade's voice was flat. "Didn't work. Just made him mean." Elara stopped a few feet from the stall. The stallion pawed at the ground, his nostrils flaring. Every line of his body screamed violence and terror in equal measure. She knew that look. She'd seen it in the mirror often enough. "You want me to work with him?" she asked. "I want to see if you're worth keeping," Cade said bluntly. "If you can get close enough to touch him without getting killed, you stay. If you can't, you're done." It wasn't a fair test. Hell, it was barely a test at all. It was an execution waiting to happen. But Elara had stopped expecting fairness a long time ago. She opened the stall door and stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the stallion exploded. He reared up with a scream that echoed through the barn, his hooves flashing in the dim light. Men shouted from outside the stall, and she heard Cade bark an order she didn't catch. But Elara didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing slow and steady. She didn't look at the horse's eyes. That was a challenge. She looked at his chest, at the way his muscles bunched and trembled, at the scars that marked his flanks where spurs had dug in too deep. "I know," she said quietly. "I know." The stallion came down hard, his hooves slamming into the ground inches from her feet. He circled her, snorting and tossing his head, looking for weakness. She didn't give him any. "They hurt you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Made you think the pain would never stop. Made you mean because mean is how you survive." The horse's ears flicked forward slightly. "But you're not mean," she said. "You're scared, and I get that. I've been scared every day for months. Scared I'd get caught. Scared I'd starve. Scared I'd die alone in the dirt with no one to remember my name." The stallion slowed, still circling but with less violence. His breathing was harsh and ragged, and foam flecked his lips. Elara took a slow step forward. The horse froze. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "I'm not going to make you do anything. I'm just going to stand here. And if you want to kick me, go ahead. But I'm not running. Not from you." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the stallion took one cautious step toward her. She held her breath. He took another step. And another. Until his nose was inches from her chest, his breath hot against her collarbone. Slowly, so slowly it felt like the world had stopped turning, Elara raised one hand. The horse didn't bolt. She touched his neck, just barely, her fingers brushing against coarse hair and twitching muscle. The stallion shuddered, but he didn't move. "There you go," she whispered. "See, not everyone's a monster." Outside the stall, she could hear the men talking in low, shocked voices. But she didn't look at them. She kept her focus on the horse, on the way his breathing was starting to slow, on the way his ears had relaxed just slightly. After what felt like an eternity, she stepped back and slipped out of the stall. Cade stood just beyond the door, his expression unreadable. The other men had gathered behind him, staring at her like she'd just walked through fire and come out the other side without a burn. "Well," Cade said finally, "I'll be damned." Elara met his eyes. "Do I stay?" He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "You stay." Relief hit her so hard she almost staggered. "But," Cade added, his voice dropping lower, "that horse is yours now. You feed him, you train him, you keep him calm. If he hurts someone, it's on you. Understood?" "Understood." Cade turned to leave, then paused. "What you did in there, that wasn't normal." "I know. How'd you learn it?" Elara glanced back at the stall where the stallion was watching her with wary, exhausted eyes. "Same way he did," she said quietly. "The hard way." Cade didn't respond. But something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like respect. Then he walked away, barking orders at the other men, and Elara was left standing alone in the barn with a broken horse and the faint, dangerous hope that maybe she'd just found something worth staying for. The first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and careful distance. Elara worked from dawn until her hands bled, mucking stalls, hauling feed, and spending hours in that corner stall with Hades. The stallion was still dangerous, still unpredictable, But slowly, inch by inch, he was learning that her presence didn't mean pain. Some days he let her brush him. Other days he barely tolerated her standing in the same space. She didn't push. Pushing was how you broke things that couldn't be fixed. The ranch hands watched her like she was a curiosity they couldn't quite figure out. Most kept their distance, throwing glances her way when they thought she wasn't looking. A few were friendly enough, nodding when she passed, offering short greetings that never turned into real conversations. But one man made her skin crawl every time he came near. His name was Doyle, mid-40s, with thinning hair and a gut that hung over his belt. He had the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes and a way of standing too close when he talked. "You're that girl Cade dragged in," he said one afternoon, cornering her near the feed bins. "The one who thinks she can tame Hades." Alara didn't look up from the bucket she was filling. "I don't think anything. I just do the work." "Funny thing, though," Doyle leaned against the wall, picking at his teeth with a splinter. "Boss don't usually hire drifters, especially not women. Makes a man wonder what you did to earn his charity." She dumped grain into the bucket with more force than necessary. "Maybe I'm just good at my job." "Maybe." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her want to scrub her skin raw. "Or maybe you're good at other things." Alara's grip tightened on the bucket handle. She'd dealt with men like Doyle before. They operated on cruelty and assumption, always looking for weak spots to dig into. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly. "Who said anything about trouble?" Doyle grinned. "Just making conversation." "Doyle!" The voice came from behind them, low and cold as a January wind. Cade stood in the barn doorway, his silhouette dark against the afternoon sun. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move from where he stood. But the temperature in the barn seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Boss," Doyle said, straightening up. "Just getting to know the new hire. Get back to work." "Sure thing." Doyle shot Alara one last look, half smirk, half warning, then sauntered past Cade without another word. Cade watched him go, then turned his attention to Alara. "He bother you again? You tell me." "I can handle it." "I'm sure you can." He crossed his arms. "But you work for me now, which means you're under my protection. Anyone gives you trouble, it's my problem. Clear?" Alara nodded slowly. She didn't trust protection. It always came with strings attached. But Cade's expression was unreadable, and she couldn't figure out what he wanted from her. "How's the horse?" he asked, changing the subject. "Better. Still skittish, but he's eating regular now." "Good." Cade glanced toward the corner stall. "I want you riding him by the end of the month." "That's ambitious. You said you were good with horses." "I am, but good doesn't mean magic." She set the bucket down. "He's been beaten for years. That kind of damage doesn't heal in a few weeks." Cade's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking for miracles. I'm asking if you can do the job." "I can do it," Alara said, meeting his eyes, "but not on your timeline. He'll be ready when he's ready." For a moment, she thought he might argue, push back the way men always did when women told them no. But instead, Cade nodded once. "Fine, but keep me updated." He turned and walked out, leaving Alara alone with the distinct impression that she'd just passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. Must see. 2 weeks in, things started to shift. It began with small moments. A ranch hand named Sam, young, barely 20, with a nervous energy that made him talk too fast, started eating breakfast at her end of the table. He didn't say much at first, just sat there shoveling food while sneaking glances at her like he was trying to work up the courage to speak. Finally, one morning, he cracked. "Is it true you got Hades to eat out of your hand?" Alara looked up from her coffee. "Who told you that?" "Everyone's talking about it." Sam leaned forward, his eyes wide. "They're saying you got some kind of gift, like you can talk to animals or something." "I can't talk to animals." "But you got him calm." "No one's been able to do that." "I just don't treat him like he's a problem that needs solving," Alara said. "Animals aren't puzzles. They're scared and angry and confused, same as people. You treat them like they matter. They respond." Sam stared at her like she'd just revealed the secrets of the universe. Huh, what?" "Nothing, just—" He grinned. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone mean, I guess. Boss only hires people who don't need friends." Alara sipped her coffee. "Maybe he hired me because I don't want any." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Because when Sam started showing up at the barn in the evenings to watch her work with Hades, asking questions, offering to help with the water buckets, she didn't send him away. And when Martha started leaving extra biscuits wrapped in cloth on her bedside table, she didn't refuse them. And when the other ranch hands slowly stopped looking at her like a ghost and started nodding greetings that felt almost genuine, she didn't retreat into silence the way she used to. It terrified her, because attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant someone could take it all away. Bucket. Cade, meanwhile, remained a wall she couldn't read. He moved through the ranch like a force of nature, everywhere at once, seeing everything, missing nothing. His commands were sharp and efficient, his expectations brutally high. Men jumped when he barked orders, and no one questioned his decisions twice. But sometimes, late in the evening, when the work was done and most of the hands had retreated to the bunkhouse, Alara would see him standing alone on the porch, staring out at the prairie with an expression so bleak it made her chest hurt. One night, she found him in the barn. It was past midnight, and she'd only come out because Hades had been restless earlier. She wanted to check on him before sleeping. But when she stepped into the barn, she saw lamplight spilling from the tack room and heard the quiet clink of metal on metal. Cade sat on a low stool, cleaning a saddle with methodical precision. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and old scars, and his face was shadowed with exhaustion. Alara hesitated. She should leave. Let him have his privacy. But something about the way he sat there, shoulders tense, jaw tight, made her feet stay planted. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. Cade didn't look up. "Could ask you the same thing." "Checking on Hades. He all right?" "He's fine." She stepped into the tack room, keeping her distance. "You do this every night?" "Do what?" "Sit out here alone." Cade's hand stilled on the saddle. "You keeping tabs on me?" "Just noticing patterns." He set the saddle down and finally looked at her. His eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard. "I don't sleep much. Hasn't been a priority in a long time." "Since your wife?" The air in the room changed instantly. Cade's expression went cold and shuddered, and Alara realized she'd stepped over a line she hadn't known existed. "Martha told you," he said flatly. "She mentioned it. I'm sorry. Don't be." He picked up a rag and started cleaning again, his movements rough. "It was 4 years ago. I'm fine." He wasn't fine. Anyone with eyes could see that. But Alara knew better than to push. Some wounds you didn't talk about because talking made them real again. "What was her name?" she asked instead. Cade's hands stopped. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then quietly, "Anna." "How'd she die?" "Fever. Came on fast. Took her in 3 days." His voice was flat, emotionless. "We were too far from town for a doctor. By the time I got her to one, it was too late." Alara's throat tightened. "That's not your fault." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Cade looked up at her, his expression hard. "You don't know me. You don't know what I did or didn't do." "I know you blame yourself for something you couldn't control," Alara said quietly. "I know you turned this ranch into a fortress because if you don't let anyone in, no one can hurt you again. And I know you work yourself into the ground every night because exhaustion is easier than grief." Cade stared at her, his jaw clenched so tight she thought it might crack. "You don't know anything," he said finally. "Maybe not." Alara turned to leave. "But I know what running looks like. And you've been running just as long as I have." She walked out before he could respond, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd said too much, pushed too hard. He'd probably fire her in the morning for overstepping. But when morning came, Cade didn't mention the conversation. He just handed her an extra bucket of oats for Hades and told her to get back to work. 3 weeks in, Alara made a mistake. She'd taken Hades out of the stall for the first time, just walking him around the paddock, letting him stretch his legs. He was still nervous, still prone to spooking at shadows, but he trusted her enough now to follow her lead. They were halfway around the paddock when Doyle appeared, leaning against the fence with that same ugly smirk. "Well, look at that," he called out. "The miracle worker's got her pet monster on a leash." Alara ignored him, keeping her focus on Hades. The stallion's ears flicked back, his body tensing. "Easy," she murmured. "Just ignore him." But Doyle wasn't done. He pushed off the fence and walked closer, his boots crunching loud on the gravel. You really think you're special, don't you? Think Cade keeps you around because you're good with horses? Hades snorted, tossing his head. Back off, Doyle, Elara said, her voice low. Or what? You gonna sick your boyfriend on me? Doyle laughed. Everyone knows he's got a soft spot for you. Hell, maybe you're warming his bed at night. That how you got the job? Rage flared in Elara's chest, hot and sharp and dangerous. She wanted to turn around and drive her fist into Doyle's sneering face, wanted to tell him exactly what she thought of men who used words like weapons, because they were too weak to fight fair. But Hades was losing control. She could feel it in the tension rippling through his body, the way his breathing had gone harsh and uneven. Walk away, she said to Doyle, her voice shaking. Now. Make me. That's when Hades reared. It happened so fast, Elara barely had time to react. 1 second the stallion was beside her, the next he was up on his hind legs, screaming with fury and terror. His hooves came down inches from Doyle's head, and the man scrambled backward with a shout. Elara held on to the lead rope with everything she had, her boots digging into the dirt. Easy, easy. But Hades was beyond hearing. He reared again, nearly yanking her off her feet, and she knew with sudden horrible clarity that if she let go, someone was going to die. Let him go! The shout came from across the paddock. Cade was running toward them, his face dark with fury. Elara, let go of the damn rope! But she couldn't. If she let go, Hades would bolt. And if he bolted, Cade would put him down. No, she screamed back. She threw all her weight against the rope, pulling with everything she had. Hades came down hard, his hooves slamming into the ground, and for one terrible second she thought he was going to charge straight through the fence. Then she started singing. It was stupid, ridiculous, but she didn't know what else to do, so she sang the only song she could remember from before everything fell apart. A lullaby her mother used to hum when Elara was too small to remember being safe. The melody was soft, wordless, just a string of notes that barely qualified as music. But Hades froze. His ears swiveled forward, his breathing slowed, and slowly, so slowly it felt like a miracle she didn't deserve, he lowered his head and took one shaky step toward her. Elara kept singing, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face. She reached up and touched his neck, and the stallion shuddered but didn't pull away. When she finally stopped singing, the paddock was silent. Cade stood 10 feet away, his chest heaving, his expression caught between fury and something that looked almost like awe. Doyle was gone. Probably ran off the second he realized he'd nearly gotten himself killed. Are you out of your mind? Cade's voice was low and dangerous. He could have killed you. But he didn't. That's not the point. Elara wiped her face with the back of her hand. He was scared. Doyle spooked him. I don't care what Doyle did. You don't risk your life for a horse. Why not? She met his eyes. You were going to kill him if I couldn't fix him. So what's the difference? The difference, Cade said, closing the distance between them, is that you matter more than a goddamn animal. The words hit her like a physical blow, because no one had ever said that to her before. Not once in her entire miserable life had anyone suggested she was worth more than the dirt beneath her feet. You don't know me, she said, her voice breaking. You don't know what I'm worth. I know you're brave and stubborn. And you fixed a fence in a storm when you were half dead because you couldn't stand the thought of something being broken. Cade's jaw was tight, his eyes blazing. That's worth something. Elara's chest felt like it was cracking open. I should get him back to the stall. Elara, please, just let me go. She led Hades away before Cade could say anything else, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Because for the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen a person instead of a problem. And that was more terrifying than any storm she'd ever faced. That night, Doyle disappeared. Elara heard about it the next morning from Sam, who was practically vibrating with gossip as he slid into the seat beside her at breakfast. Doyle's gone, he said, eyes wide. Cade fired him last night, told him to be off the ranch by sunup or he'd drag him off himself. Elara's stomach dropped. He fired him because of what happened in the paddock? Not just that. Turns out he's been stealing from the ranch store for months. Cade caught him red-handed last night. Sam grinned. Good riddance, if you ask me. Guy was a snake. Elara didn't respond. She knew the timing wasn't a coincidence. Cade had gotten rid of Doyle because of her, because Doyle had made her a target. and Cade didn't tolerate threats to his people. His people. When had she become one of his people? Woke. The days grew longer and hotter as spring bled into early summer. The ranch bustled with activity, branding cattle, repairing winter damage, preparing for the drive to market that would come in the fall. Alara worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life, and every night she collapsed into bed so exhausted she didn't have the energy to dream. But Hades was improving, slowly, painfully, but improving. He let her saddle him now, though he still flinched when the girth tightened. He followed her around the paddock like a giant, dangerous shadow, and sometimes, when she sang that wordless lullaby, he would lower his head and rest his nose against her shoulder like he was trying to remember what trust felt like. Cade watched them often. She'd catch him standing at the fence, his expression unreadable, his arms crossed over his chest. Sometimes he'd nod approvingly. Other times he'd just stare, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have an answer. One evening, after she'd finished brushing Hades down and putting him back in his stall, she found Cade waiting for her outside the barn. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a question. They walked in silence toward the northern pasture, where the grass stretched out like an ocean and the sun was sinking low on the horizon. The air smelled like dust and wildflowers, and the sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson that made the world feel bigger than it actually was. "You've done good work," Cade said finally. "With Hades." "He's not ready to ride yet." "I know." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I'm not pushing. I just wanted you to know I see it. What you're doing." Alara shifted uncomfortably. Compliments made her nervous. "It's just my job." "It's more than that." Cade's gaze was steady, intense. "You care. About him. About the other horses. Hell, even about the ranch hands who don't deserve it. What's your point?" "My point is that you're good for this place." He hesitated, then added, "And I want you to stay. Not just for a week or a month. Permanently." Alara's heart lurched. "Cade, I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give," he said quickly. I need people I can trust, and I trust you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. Because trust was the one thing Alara couldn't afford to give. Trust meant staying. Staying meant putting down roots, and roots meant Lucian could find her. "I can't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why not?" "Because it's not safe." "For who? You or me?" "Both." She looked away, staring at the horizon. "The man I'm running from. He doesn't stop. He doesn't forgive. And when he finds me, and he will find me, everyone around me becomes a target." Cade's jaw tightened. "Let him come." "You don't understand. I understand that you're scared. I understand that someone hurt you and made you think you don't deserve a life." He stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. "But you do, Alara. You deserve a place to call home. And if this bastard shows up here, he'll have to go through me first." Alara's throat closed up. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that someone could protect her, that she could stop running and start living. But belief was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'm not your responsibility," she said. "Maybe not. But you're part of this ranch now, whether you like it or not." Cade reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, careful, nothing like the hands that had hurt her before. "Stay, please." For one wild, reckless moment, Alara almost said yes. Then she thought of Lucian's cold smile, his soft voice promising consequences. The way he'd looked at her the last time they were in the same room, like she was a possession he'd temporarily misplaced. "I'll think about it," she said finally. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Cade nodded slowly, then turned and walked back toward the house, leaving her alone with the sunset and the terrible, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found something worth fighting for. Summer came to Iron Ridge like a fever, turning the prairie gold and filling the air with heat that shimmered off the horizon in waves. The work grew harder, the days longer, and Alara fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to permanence. She rode Hades for the first time on a Tuesday morning when the sun was barely up and the world still held the coolness of night. Sam had volunteered to stand nearby with a rope, just in case, but Alara waved him off. If this went wrong, she didn't want anyone else getting hurt. The stallion had been skittish when she saddled him, his ears flicking back and forth, his muscles twitching beneath her hands. But when she swung herself up into the saddle, settling her weight carefully, he didn't bolt, didn't rear. He just stood there, trembling slightly, waiting to see what she'd do next. "Good boy," she murmured, running her hand along his neck. "We're just going to walk, nice and easy." She pressed her heels gently against his sides, and Hades took one tentative step forward, then another, and another. By the time they'd circled the paddock twice, Alara's face was wet with tears she didn't bother wiping away. Cade appeared at the fence halfway through the third lap. He didn't say anything, just watched with that unreadable expression he wore like armor. But when she finally dismounted and led Hades back to the barn, he followed. "You did it," he said quietly. "He did it." Alara ran her hand down the stallion's nose. "I just gave him a reason to try." "Still," Cade paused, then added, "I'm proud of you." The words hit her sideways. Alara looked up sharply, searching his face for the lie, the angle, the thing he wanted in return. But all she saw was sincerity, rough and awkward, like he was out of practice saying things that mattered. "Thank you," she said finally, not knowing what else to say. Cade nodded and turned to leave, but stopped at the barn door. "There's a town gathering this weekend. Festival, market, some kind of celebration. Most of the hands are going." He didn't look at her. "You should come. I don't do crowds." "Figured as much. But you've been here 2 months and haven't left the ranch once. Might do you good to see something besides horses and fences." "Is that an order?" "It's a suggestion." He finally glanced back at her. "But if you come, I'll keep an eye on you. Make sure no one bothers you." Alara wanted to say no, wanted to stay safe inside the boundaries of Iron Ridge, where the world couldn't reach her. But something in Cade's voice, something careful and almost hopeful, made her hesitate. "I'll think about it," she said. He smiled, just barely, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. But it was there. "That's all I'm asking." Saturday arrived with clear skies and a wind that carried the smell of dust and distant rain. The ranch emptied out early, most of the hands piling into wagons or saddling horses for the ride into town. Martha packed baskets of food and fussed over everyone like a mother hen, and even the animals seemed restless with the change in routine. Alara spent the morning with Hades, grooming him until his coat shone and his mane fell smooth down his neck. She was trying to decide whether to risk the trip into town when Sam appeared at the stall door, grinning like a fool. "You coming or what?" "I haven't decided." "Well, decide fast. Cade's holding a wagon for you, and he's not known for his patience." Alara's stomach twisted. "He's waiting?" "Yep. Says he won't leave until you give him an answer." Sam laughed. "Never seen him do that for anyone. You must be special." Special. The word sat wrong in her chest, heavy and uncomfortable. But she found herself walking toward the front of the house anyway, where Cade sat on the driver's bench of a sturdy wagon, the reins loose in his hands. He'd cleaned up, traded his work clothes for a dark shirt and clean trousers, his hair combed back, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked almost civilized, except for the hardness in his eyes that never quite went away. "Changed your mind?" he asked. "I don't know yet." "Fair enough." He gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit with me while you decide." Alara climbed up, hyper-aware of how close they'd be sitting. The bench was narrow, their shoulders nearly touching, and she could smell leather and soap and something else that was just him. Cade snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. They rode in silence for a while, following the trail that wound through the prairie toward the distant smudge of buildings on the horizon. The sun was warm on Alara's face, and the wind tugged at her hair, and for a few stolen moments she let herself pretend this was normal, that she was just a woman riding to town with a man who might care about her. "You don't talk much," Cade said eventually. "Neither do you." "Guess we're well matched, then." Alara glanced at him. "Is that what we are? Matched?" Cade's jaw tightened. "I don't know what we are, but I know I sleep better when you're around. And I know this ranch runs smoother with you in it. And I know that when I see you with that horse, I think maybe broken things can be fixed after all." Her throat went tight. "I'm not fixed." "Didn't say you were. Hell, I'm not fixed either." He looked over at her, his dark eyes serious. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe we don't need to be fixed. Maybe we just need to stop pretending we're fine when we're not." Alara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and they rode the rest of the way in a silence that felt less empty than before. Rock. The town was called Ridgemont, and it was bigger than Alara expected. Two main streets lined with buildings, a church at one end, a saloon at the other, and everything in between packed with people. The festival was in full swing, with stalls selling food and crafts, a makeshift stage where someone was playing a fiddle, and children running wild through the crowds. Cade helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her arm. "Stay close," he said quietly. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable, you tell me. I'm not a child. Never said you were, but you're under my protection, and I take that seriously." The way he said it, firm, matter-of-fact, made her chest ache. No one had ever protected her before. Not really. And she didn't know how to accept it without feeling like she owed something in return. They walked through the market together, Cade nodding at people who called his name, Alara keeping her head down and her eyes on the ground. She felt exposed here, visible in a way that made her skin crawl. Every stranger's face could be Lucian's. Every man who looked at her too long could be one of his hired hunters. "You all right?" Cade asked, his hand finding the small of her back. "Just nervous." "Want to leave?" She almost said yes, almost let the fear win. But then she saw a stall selling ribbons and cloth, bright colors spilling across the table like captured sunlight, and something in her chest loosened. "Can we look?" she asked, pointing. Cade followed her over, standing slightly behind her while she ran her fingers over the fabrics. There were silks and cottons, linens and wools, all dyed in shades she hadn't seen since before Lucian. She picked up a ribbon, deep green, the color of pine trees, and held it up to the light. "That'd look good on you," Cade said quietly. Alara set it down quickly. "I don't need it." "Didn't say you needed it. Said it'd look good." The woman running the stall smiled. "Your husband has good taste." Alara's face went hot. "He's not—" "I'll take it," Cade said, pulling coins from his pocket before Alara could protest. "And the blue one, too." The woman wrapped both ribbons in paper and handed them over with a knowing smile that made Alara want to sink into the ground. Cade passed the package to her without ceremony, then gestured toward the food stalls. "Come on, you need to eat." They bought meat pies and fresh bread, sitting on a bench near the edge of the square to eat. Alara tore into her food with the kind of hunger that came from years of scarcity, barely tasting it. Cade ate slower, watching the crowd with the alertness of someone who never fully relaxed. "You do this often?" Alara asked between bites. "Come to town?" "Not if I can help it." "Then why come today?" Cade was quiet for a moment. "Because you needed to see something besides the ranch, and because I wanted to see you somewhere that wasn't work." "Why?" "Because maybe I like you, Alara. Ever think of that?" The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, panic and something dangerously close to hope warring in her chest. "You don't know me," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know enough. You don't know what I've done, what I've survived, the things that— I don't care." Cade turned to face her fully, his expression fierce. "I don't care what happened before. I care about who you are now, and right now, you're the strongest person I've ever met." Alara's vision blurred. "I'm not strong. I'm terrified every single day." "That's what makes you strong. You're terrified, and you keep going anyway." He reached over and brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "That's courage, Alara. Real courage." She wanted to believe him, wanted to lean into that touch and let herself have this one good thing. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the noise of the crowd. "Well, well, if it isn't Cade Mercer." Alara's blood turned to ice. The man walking toward them was tall and lean, dressed in expensive clothes that didn't belong in a frontier town. His hair was dark and slicked back, his face handsome in a cold, calculated way, and his eyes, pale blue and empty, swept over Alara with recognition that made her stomach drop. It wasn't Lucienne, but it was close enough. "Garrett," Cade said, his voice flat. "Didn't know you were in Ridgemont. Just passing through." Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Doing some business for a client in St. Louis. You know how it is?" Alara couldn't breathe, couldn't move, because she knew exactly what kind of business men like Garrett did, and she knew exactly who his client was. Cade must have felt her freeze because his hand moved to her shoulder, firm and grounding. What kind of business? Oh, tracking down lost property, runaway investments. Garrett's gaze slid to Alara, lingering just a moment too long. People tend to disappear out here, but they always leave traces. That's so. Cade's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Indeed. Garrett tipped his hat. Well, I won't keep you. Enjoy the festival. He walked away, disappearing into the crowd, and Alara felt the world tilt sideways. Alara! Cade's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Alara, look at me! She couldn't, because Garrett had seen her, recognized her, and that meant Lucien knew exactly where she was. We need to leave, she managed, her voice shaking. Right now! What's going on? That man, he works for Lucien. He knows who I am. He's going to tell him. She grabbed Cade's arm, her nails digging into his skin. We have to go. Now! Cade didn't argue. He pulled her to her feet and guided her through the crowd, moving fast but not running, his body shielding hers from view. They reached the wagon in minutes, and he practically lifted her onto the bench before climbing up beside her. The ride back to the ranch was a blur. Alara's mind raced, calculating distances and timelines. If Garrett sent word tonight, Lucien could be here in a week. Maybe less if he hired faster riders. And when he came, he wouldn't come alone. Tell me everything, Cade said, his voice cutting through her panic. What? About this Lucien, about why you're running. I need to know what we're dealing with. Alara's hands twisted in her lap. He's rich, powerful. He owns half of St. Louis, properties, businesses, politicians, and he thinks he owns me. Why? Because I was stupid enough to take a job in his house when I had nowhere else to go. Her voice cracked. He called me his ward, said he was helping me, but what he really wanted was something he could control, something that couldn't say no. Cade's jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. He hurt you. It wasn't a question. He never hit me, Alara said quietly, but there are other ways to hurt someone, other ways to make them feel like they're nothing. She looked down at her hands. I tried to leave twice before. Both times he found me, brought me back, locked me in a room until I learned my lesson. How'd you get out the third time? I waited, watched, learned his routines, his guards, his weaknesses. And one night, when he was entertaining guests and everyone was distracted, I slipped out through a servant's entrance and ran. She swallowed hard. I've been running ever since. Cade was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You're not running anymore. Cade, up. I mean it. He looked at her, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it. You're staying at Iron Ridge, and if this bastard shows up, he'll have to go through me and every man on this ranch. Understood? You don't know what he's capable of. And he doesn't know what I'm capable of. Cade's voice was cold as winter. Let him come. Mott. The ranch felt different when they got back. Smaller. More vulnerable. Alara couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the shadows, of danger creeping closer with every passing hour. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring out at the prairie, waiting for riders that didn't come. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. Around midnight, there was a soft knock at her door. It's me, Cade's voice said. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, still dressed, a rifle slung over one shoulder. Can't sleep either? He asked. No. Mind if I come in? Alara hesitated, then stepped aside. Cade entered and set the rifle against the wall, then moved to the window where she'd been sitting. I've got men posted around the perimeter, he said. Anyone comes near this ranch will know about it. He won't come tonight, maybe not for days, but he'll come. Then we'll be ready. Cade turned to face her. You're not alone in this, Alara, not anymore. She wanted to believe that, but belief required trust, and trust was a luxury she'd lost the right 2 years ago. Why are you doing this? She asked. Why risk everything for someone like me? Someone like you. Cade's expression softened. You say that like you're worthless, like you're not worth protecting. I'm not. Yes, you are. He crossed the room and stood in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried that matched her own. Anna used to say that the world was full of people who'd given up on being human. People who'd let cruelty win because it was easier than fighting back. His voice dropped. But you haven't given up. You're still fighting, still trying, and that makes you worth everything. Ilara's chest felt like it was caving in. I'm scared. I know. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Too late. I'm already involved. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. And I don't regret it. The touch was gentle, careful. Nothing like the hands that had grabbed and controlled and hurt. Ilara's breath caught, and before she could stop herself, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. Cade went still. Then, slowly, his arms came around her, holding her like she was something precious instead of broken. They stood like that for a long time, neither of them speaking, both of them trying to convince themselves that this fragile thing between them could survive what was coming. 3 days later, Ilara made the decision that would change everything. She was in the barn with Hades, brushing his coat and singing that wordless lullaby, when Martha appeared at the stall door. "Rider coming," she said, her face pale. "Alone on a fancy horse. Cade's meeting him at the gate." Ilara's blood went cold. "Is it him?" "Don't know, but whoever it is, they're dressed too fine for honest work." Ilara dropped the brush and ran. She reached the front gate just as Cade stepped into view, the rifle in his hands, his stance protective and dangerous. The rider was still 100 yards out, but even from this distance, Ilara could see the expensive cut of his clothes, the arrogant way he sat his horse. It wasn't Lucien, it was Garrett. "That's far enough," Cade called out, his voice carrying across the prairie. Garrett reined in his horse, his hands raised in a mockery of peace. "Easy, Mercer. I'm just here to deliver a message. Deliver it and get off my land." "Fair enough." Garrett's eyes found Ilara standing behind Cade, and his smile turned sharp. "Mr. Voss sends his regards. He's very interested in recovering his property." "She's not property," Cade said coldly. "That's not how the law sees it. She was his ward, under his legal protection. When she left without permission, she became a runaway." Garrett pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have documents proving his guardianship, which means I have the legal right to take her back." "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged." Garrett's smile didn't waver. "But it doesn't have to be. Mr. Voss is a reasonable man. He's willing to forget this unfortunate incident if she returns voluntarily. No charges filed, no trouble for anyone involved. And if she doesn't," Cade asked, "then he'll come himself. And when he does, he won't come alone." Garrett's gaze slid back to Ilara. "You know how thorough he can be, how persistent. And you know what happens to people who get in his way." Ilara's hands were shaking, because she did know. She'd seen what Lucien did to people who crossed him, seen the business partners who disappeared, the servants who were dismissed without references and left to starve, the rivals who suddenly found themselves bankrupt and broken. If she stayed, Cade would become a target. The ranch would become a target. Everyone she'd come to care about would suffer because of her. The choice was obvious. "I'll go," she said quietly. "The hell you will," Cade snapped, not looking at her. "Cade, no." He turned to face her, his expression fierce. "You're not going anywhere with him. If I don't, people will get hurt. People will get hurt either way. At least this way, you're not the one suffering." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Cade's voice dropped, rough with emotion. "I understand that you're terrified, that you've been running so long you've forgotten how to stand still. But I'm asking you, begging you to trust me. Let me protect you." Ilara's vision blurred. "I can't. I won't let you destroy yourself for me." "Then let me make that choice." He reached out and gripped her shoulders. "Stay. Fight. Let me stand with you instead of watching you walk away." Behind them, Garrett cleared his throat. "Touching, but Mr. Voss isn't known for his patience. I'll give you until morning to make your decision. After that, I come back with the law, and with men who won't be as polite as I am." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, leaving Ilara and Cade standing in the dust. "I have to go," Ilara said, tears streaming down her face. "Tonight, before he comes back. If you run, I'll follow you." "Cade, I mean it." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "You can run to the ends of the earth, and I will follow, because that's what you do for people. You He stopped, jaw clenched. For people who matter. You can't save me. Watch me. They stood there staring at each other, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between them. Alara wanted to stay, wanted to believe that love, because that's what this was, she realized with stunning clarity, could be enough to fight the darkness. But she'd spent too long running to remember how to stand her ground. That night, while the ranch slept, Alara packed what little she owned into a saddlebag. She moved quietly through the house, avoiding the creaky floorboards, her heart breaking with every step. She made it as far as the barn. Hades was waiting in his stall, ears perked forward like he'd been expecting her. Alara opened the door and pressed her face against his neck, breathing in his familiar smell. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Where do you think you're going?" Alara spun around. Cade stood in the barn doorway, his rifle at his side, his expression unreadable. "I'm leaving," she said, forcing her voice steady, "before Garrett comes back, before Lucien destroys everything you've built." "And you thought you'd just slip away in the middle of the night without saying goodbye?" "Goodbyes don't make it easier." "No, they don't." Cade walked toward her slowly. "But running does make you a coward." The word hit like a slap. "I'm trying to protect you. By abandoning everyone who cares about you, by proving Lucien right, that you're nothing more than a scared girl who'll always choose fear over courage." He stopped in front of her. "That's not protection, Alara. That's surrender." "What else am I supposed to do?" "Stay. Fight. Stop letting him win." Cade's voice cracked. "Stop running from the one place you actually belong." Alara's legs gave out. She sank to her knees in the dirt, sobs tearing out of her chest. "I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be anything except afraid." Cade knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms. "Then be afraid with me. Be scared and angry and broken with me. But don't leave." She cried against his chest, years of fear and exhaustion pouring out in waves. And Cade held her through all of it, his arms steady, his voice murmuring reassurances that she barely heard but felt in every corner of her shattered heart. When she finally ran out of tears, she pulled back and looked at him. His face was wet too, she realized. This hard, brutal man who never showed weakness was crying for her. "If I stay," she said hoarsely, "people might die." "If you leave," Cade said, "I know I will." And somehow, against every instinct screaming at her to run, Alara made the choice to stay. Morning came too fast and too bright, the sun spilling across the prairie like spilled honey. Alara stood at the window of her room, watching the ranch come to life, wondering if this would be the last sunrise she'd see from this place. Cade had stayed with her until dawn, neither of them sleeping, neither of them talking much, just sitting in the barn with their backs against Hades' stall, sharing the quiet terror of what was coming. When the first light touched the horizon, he'd finally stood and offered her his hand. "We need to prepare," he'd said. Now standing in the main room of the house, Alara watched as Cade spread a hand-drawn map of the ranch across the table. The men gathered around him, Sam, 3 older ranch hands named Pike, Garrett, and Monroe, and Martha, who stood at the edge with her arms crossed and her mouth set in a grim line. "Garrett's coming back today," Cade said without preamble, "and he won't be alone. We need to be ready." "How many you think he'll bring?" Pike asked. He was in his 50s, weathered and scarred, with the look of a man who'd seen his share of violence. "Hard to say. Could be 2 men, could be 10. Voss has money, which means he has options." Cade traced his finger along the northern boundary of the ranch. "We'll post lookouts here, here, and here. Anyone approaches, we know about it before they reach the house. And when they get here?" Monroe was younger than Pike, but just as hard, with a crooked nose that had been broken more than once. "We talk first. Try to settle this without bloodshed." Cade's jaw tightened. "But if it comes down to it, we protect what's ours." Sam glanced at Alara, his young face pale. "You really think they'll try to take her by force?" "I think Lucien Voss is used to getting what he wants," Alara said quietly. "And he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process." Martha made a disgusted sound. "Men like that should be shot." "Careful, Martha," Cade said. "That kind of talk gets people hanged." "Only if someone reports it, and everyone here knows how to keep their mouths shut." She looked around the room, her gaze sharp. "Right?" The men nodded, one by one, and Alara felt something crack open in her chest. These people barely knew her, had no reason to risk themselves for a stranger who'd brought danger to their doorstep, but they were doing it anyway. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you all doing this?" Pike answered first. "Because Cade says you're worth protecting. That's good enough for me." "Because you fixed my saddle when it broke," Sam added. "And you didn't make fun of me for crying when my horse got sick." Monroe shrugged. "Because men who treat women like property deserve whatever they get." Martha's expression softened. "Because you're one of us now, girl, and we take care of our own." Alara's vision blurred. She'd spent so long believing she was worthless, that she didn't deserve protection or kindness or anything resembling family. But these people, these rough, flawed, stubborn people, were proving her wrong. "Thank you," she managed. Cade met her eyes across the table, and the look he gave her was so raw, so full of things he couldn't say in front of the others, that it stole her breath. "All right," he said, turning back to the map. "Let's get to work." Megtape. By noon, the ranch was a fortress. Men patrolled the perimeter, rifles at the ready. The horses had been moved to the far pasture, away from potential danger. Windows were shuttered, doors barred, and every able body had been assigned a position. Alara spent most of the morning in the barn with Hades, trying to keep him calm despite the tension crackling through the air. The stallion could sense her fear, pawing at the ground and tossing his head every few minutes. "I know," she murmured, running her hand down his neck. "I'm scared too." "Talking to yourself now?" She turned to find Cade standing in the doorway, his rifle slung over one shoulder. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes and tension in every line of his body. "Just keeping him company," she said. Cade stepped into the stall, his presence filling the small space. "You doing all right?" "Not really. Honest. I like that." He leaned against the wall, his gaze fixed on her face. "You know we're going to get through this, right?" "You can't promise that. I can promise I'll fight like hell to make it true." He paused. "And I can promise that whatever happens, you're not going back with him, not while I'm breathing." Alara's throat tightened. "Cade, I need to say something," he interrupted. "And I need to say it now, in case I don't get another chance." "Don't talk like that." "Alara, listen." He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her face in his hands. "I know the timing's terrible. I know you've got 100 reasons to tell me to go to hell, but I need you to know that these last few months with you here, they've been the first time I've felt alive since Anna died. The first time I've wanted something beyond just surviving." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." The words came out rough, almost angry, like he was furious at himself for feeling them. "I'm saying you matter to me more than this ranch, more than my pride, more than anything I thought I wanted. And if we survive today, I want a chance to prove it." Alara's hands came up to cover his, her eyes searching his face. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Yes, I do. I'm asking for you, broken pieces and all, scared and angry and running from demons I can't even see. I'm asking for everything you think makes you unlovable, because that's the part I love most." A sob tore from her throat. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone in." "Then we'll figure it out together." He pressed his forehead against hers. "But first we need to survive this day. Can you do that for me? Can you fight?" "I don't know how to fight." "Yes, you do. You've been fighting your whole life. You just need to stop fighting alone." Before she could respond, a shout echoed from outside. "Riders coming!" Cade's entire body went rigid. He pulled back, his expression shifting from vulnerable to dangerous in a heartbeat. "Stay in the house. No matter what happens, you stay inside with Martha." "Cade, that's not a request." He grabbed his rifle and headed for the door, then paused. "If things go wrong, if it looks like they're going to take you, there's a horse saddled behind the south barn. You run, and you don't look back, understood? I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to." His voice was hard, commanding. "Promise me." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but the look in his eyes, part desperation, part plea, made her nod. "I promise." He left without another word, and Alara stood alone in the stall, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She made it halfway to the house before curiosity and terror overwhelmed her. Instead of going inside, she slipped around to the side where she could see the front gate without being visible from the road. 5 riders approached, their horses kicking up dust in the afternoon sun. They moved with the casual confidence of men who'd never been told no, their rifles visible in saddle holsters, their expressions hard. But it was the man in the center that made Alara's blood turn to ice. Lucien Voss sat his horse like a king surveying conquered territory. He was older than she remembered, closer to 50 than 40, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent manipulating people. His clothes were expensive, tailored, completely out of place on the frontier, and his face wore the same cold, calculated expression she'd seen in her nightmares for months. Cade stood at the gate, flanked by Pike and Monroe. His rifle was held loose but ready, his stance protective and unyielding. "That's far enough," he called out. Lucien reined in his horse 20 feet from the gate. His pale eyes swept over the ranch, taking in the men positioned on the roof, the barred windows, the defensive preparations. A small smile touched his lips. "Mr. Mercer, I presume?" "You presume right. State your business." "My business is simple. I'm here to collect something that belongs to me." Lucien's gaze moved past Cade, searching. A young woman, dark hair, gray eyes, answers to the name Alara Quinn. She doesn't answer to anyone. Charming, but legally she's my ward, which means she's under my protection and authority. Lucien pulled a folded document from his coat. "I have papers signed by a judge in St. Louis confirming my guardianship. This gives me the legal right to take her back." "Those papers don't mean shit out here." "On the contrary, the law is the law, regardless of location." Lucien's smile widened. "And I have a federal marshal waiting in Ridgemont, ready to enforce it. So you have 2 choices, Mr. Mercer. You can hand her over peacefully, or you can face charges for harboring a runaway, obstruction of justice, interference with legal guardianship, possibly kidnapping. That's a rope around your neck and this ranch seized by the government." Cade's jaw clenched. "She's not going anywhere." "Then you're a fool." Lucien's voice remained calm, reasonable, like he was explaining simple arithmetic to a child. "I understand you've developed an attachment. Men often do. She has a certain quality that inspires misguided heroism, but she's not worth destroying yourself over. She's not worth anything, really. Just a damaged girl who'll run the moment things get difficult." "You're wrong." "Am I?" Lucien looked directly at the spot where Alara was hiding, and she realized with horror that he'd known she was there all along. "Why don't we ask her? Alara, darling, come out where I can see you." Alara's legs locked. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear. But Cade had asked her to fight, and running was just another kind of surrender. She stepped out from behind the building. Lucien's smile grew. "There you are. I've missed you." "I haven't missed you." "Of course you have. You've been lost without me. Look at you, working as common labor, living in squalor, wasting yourself on people who'll forget you the moment you're gone." He dismounted smoothly, his movements elegant and controlled. "But I forgive you. Come home with me now, and we'll forget this entire unfortunate incident. I'm not going anywhere with you." "Alara." His tone changed, sharpening into something dangerous. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. You know I always win. You've tried this before, and each time I've brought you back. What makes you think this time will be any different?" "Because this time I'm not alone." Lucien laughed. Actually laughed. "You think these ranch hands will protect you? These men who'll scatter the moment I show them a federal warrant? You think Mercer here will throw away everything he's built for a woman he's known a few months?" He took a step forward. "No one sacrifices for someone like you, Alara. No one ever has, and no one ever will. You're not worth it." The words hit like physical blows, each one landing on old wounds that had never healed. Because part of her, the part that had been beaten down for years, believed him. Believed she was worthless. Believed no one would actually fight for her when things got hard. But then Cade spoke. "You're right about one thing," he said, his voice carrying across the distance. "I barely know her. 3 months isn't long, but I know enough. I know she fixed a fence in a storm when she was dying. I know she calmed a horse every man on this ranch was afraid of. I know she works harder than anyone I've ever met and never asks for more than she's earned." He took a step forward, his rifle still loose in his hands. And I know that any man who treats a woman the way you've treated her deserves to die alone and unmourned. But, what guys? Lucian's smile vanished. Brave words. Let's see if they hold up when the marshal arrives with a warrant for your arrest. Then let him come. But you're not taking her today. We'll see about that. Lucien made a small gesture, and the 4 men with him dismounted, their hands moving to their rifles. The tension spiked instantly, every man on both sides calculating odds and distances. Last chance, Lucien said. Hand her over or this gets messy. Then it gets messy. Time seemed to slow. Alara saw Lucian's hand move toward his coat, saw Cade's rifle start to rise, saw the other men reaching for weapons, and then she screamed, "Stop!" Everyone froze. Alara stepped forward, her hands raised, her voice shaking but clear. "I'll go with you." "No," Cade said immediately. "Alara, I'll go," she repeated, looking at Lucien. "But not because you own me, not because I think you're right. I'll go because I won't let these people die for me." Lucian's expression shifted into something resembling triumph. A wise decision. "I'm not finished," Alara's voice grew stronger. "I'll go with you today. But the moment we reach St. Louis, I'm filing a petition with the courts to dissolve your guardianship. I'm hiring a lawyer and I'm fighting you legally. And if you try to lock me up again, I'll burn your house down with you inside it." The threat was hollow. She had no money for lawyers, no proof of mistreatment, no real power. But saying it out loud felt like taking back a piece of herself that Lucien had stolen years ago. Lucien studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll discuss it when we get home. Now come along before I lose my patience." Alara started walking toward him, every step feeling like walking to her own execution. Behind her, she heard Cade swear viciously, heard him try to follow, heard Pike and Monroe holding him back. "Let her go, boss," Pike was saying. "She made her choice." "The hell she did." Cade's voice was raw with fury and desperation. "Alara!" She didn't turn around, didn't let herself look back. Because if she saw his face, she'd break. And she needed to be strong enough to do this one last thing. She was 10 feet from Lucien when Sam appeared out of nowhere. The young ranch hand stepped between Alara and Lucien, his rifle raised, his hand shaking but his expression set with determination. "She's not going anywhere," Sam said. Lucien sighed. "Move, boy." "No. I admire your loyalty, but you're about to throw your life away for nothing." "She's not nothing," Sam's voice cracked. "She's family." One of Lucien's men raised his rifle, aiming directly at Sam's chest. Alara's heart stopped. "Sam, get down!" The world exploded into chaos. Cade's rifle cracked first, the shot taking down the man aiming at Sam. Then everyone was shooting, the air filling with gunsmoke and noise and screaming. Alara hit the ground, covering her head, watching through the dust as men scattered and dove for cover. She saw Pike take a bullet to the shoulder and keep firing. Saw Monroe tackle one of Lucien's men. Saw Cade moving through the violence like something unleashed, his face dark with rage. And then she saw Lucien. He wasn't fighting, wasn't taking cover. He was walking toward her through the chaos, calm as death, a pistol in his hand. "Enough," he said quietly, pointing the gun at her head. "Everyone stop, or she dies." The shooting ceased instantly. Men on both sides froze, weapons still raised, breathing hard. Cade stood 15 feet away, his rifle aimed at Lucien's chest. "Pull that trigger and you're dead before she hits the ground." "Perhaps, but she'll still be dead." Lucien's hand was steady, his expression mild. "Is that what you want? Her blood on your conscience? Is that what you want?" Cade countered. "Because if she dies, there's nothing stopping me from hunting you to the ends of the earth. And I promise you, Voss, I will make it hurt." Empty threats from a desperate man. "Try me." They stared at each other, 2 men who'd never backed down, with Alara's life balanced between them. And that's when Alara made her choice. She grabbed the pistol's barrel and yanked it away from her head. The gun went off, the shot going wide, and she drove her elbow into Lucien's stomach with everything she had. He doubled over, gasping, and she brought her knee up into his face. Blood exploded from his nose, and he went down hard. Alara stood over him, breathing hard, her whole body shaking. "I'm not your property, I'm not your ward, and I'm not running anymore." Lucien looked up at her, blood streaming down his face, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw fear in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he wheezed. "Maybe. But at least I'll regret it as a free woman. Cade was beside her in seconds, his hand on her shoulder, his rifle still aimed at Lucien's chest. You heard her. Get off my land. Lucien's remaining men helped him up, all of them bloodied and beaten. They mounted their horses slowly, and Lucien paused before riding away. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Alara said quietly. It is. He rode off without another word, his men following, leaving nothing but dust and blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder. The moment they were out of sight, Alara's legs gave out. She sank to the ground, her whole body shaking with shock and adrenaline, and something that felt dangerously close to victory. Cade dropped to his knees beside her, his hands running over her face, her arms, checking for injuries. Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? I'm okay. She grabbed his hands, holding them still. Is everyone else? Pike took one in the shoulder, but he'll live. Everyone else is fine. Cade's expression was fierce, almost angry. What the hell were you thinking? You could have been killed. I was thinking I was tired of being afraid, tired of letting him win. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You asked me to fight, so I fought. Cade pulled her into his arms so hard it almost hurt, his face buried in her hair. Don't ever do that again. Don't ever put yourself in danger like that. Can't promise that. Try anyway. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the ranch hands dealt with the aftermath around them. When they finally pulled apart, Alara saw Martha standing on the porch, smiling through her own tears. Come on, the older woman called. Let's get you cleaned up. You look like hell. Alara laughed, the sound wild and slightly hysterical, because she'd just beaten a man who'd controlled her for years. She'd stood her ground instead of running, and she'd done it surrounded by people who'd been willing to die for her. Maybe she was worth fighting for after all. Tamed. Night fell over Iron Ridge like a blanket, stars spilling across the sky in numbers Alara had stopped noticing during her months of running. She sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket Martha had forced on her, watching the prairie disappear into darkness. Pike was inside, being patched up by Martha with more cursing than sympathy. The other men had retreated to the bunkhouse, exhausted but triumphant, already turning the day's events into a story they'd tell for years. Cade sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He hadn't said much since the fight ended, just stayed near her like he was afraid she'd disappear if he looked away. What happens now? Alara asked quietly. Now we wait and see if he comes back with that marshal he mentioned. And if he does? Then we fight that battle too. Cade glanced at her. But I don't think he will. Why not? Because you broke his nose in front of his men. Made him look weak. Men like him can't afford that. Cade's mouth quirked slightly. He'll probably go back to St. Louis and pretend this never happened. Easier to move on than admit a woman half his size made him bleed. Alara hoped he was right, but she knew Lucien well enough to know that pride didn't heal quickly. I meant what I said, she said, about not running anymore. I know. I want to stay here, at Iron Ridge, if you'll still have me. Cade turned to face her fully. There's nowhere else I want you to be. Even after everything that happened today? Even knowing I brought that danger here? Especially after today. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so familiar now it made her chest ache. You stood your ground. You fought back. And you trusted me enough to let me stand with you. That's not danger, Alara. That's courage. She leaned into his touch, letting herself have this moment of peace. I don't know what comes next. Neither do I, but I know we'll figure it out together. He paused. And I know I meant what I said this morning. I love you. That didn't change just because things got hard. Alara's breath caught. I don't know if I know how to love someone back. Not the right way. There's no right way. There's just trying. Cade's hand moved to cup her cheek. And you've been trying your whole life. You just didn't have anyone worth trying for. Until now. Until now. She kissed him then, soft and tentative, still learning what it felt like to be wanted without being owned. Cade kissed her back with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about him, like he was afraid she might break if he held on too tight. When they pulled apart, Alara rested her forehead against his. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for letting me try. They sat together in the darkness, watching the stars wheel overhead, two broken people learning how to build something whole. The days that followed didn't bring immediate peace. They brought something harder, the slow, painful work of learning to live without looking over your shoulder. Alara woke every morning expecting to find Lucian standing at the end of her bed, expected federal marshals to ride up with warrants and chains, expected the fragile safety she'd found to shatter like glass under a boot heel. But weeks passed, and nothing happened. Lucien didn't return. No marshals appeared. The only visitors were neighboring ranchers stopping by to trade supplies or share news from town, and none of them mentioned a wealthy St. Louis businessman nursing a broken nose and wounded pride. "He's not coming back," Cade said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Pike was finally back to work, his shoulder still stiff but healing. The bullet holes in the barn wall had been patched, the blood stains scrubbed from the dirt. "You don't know that," Alara said. "I know men like him. They move on when something costs more than it's worth. And you, standing up to him, making him bleed in front of witnesses, you made yourself too expensive to chase." Cade's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together. He'll find someone else to control, someone easier. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it made Alara's stomach turn. So some other woman gets what I escaped? Maybe. Or maybe she'll be stronger than he expects. Maybe she'll find her own way out. Cade squeezed her hand. "You can't save everyone, Alara. Sometimes you just save yourself and hope it's enough." She knew he was right, but the guilt sat heavy in her chest anyway, mixing with the strange, unfamiliar sensation of safety until she couldn't tell them apart. Life at Iron Ridge settled into something resembling normal, though normal was a word Alara was still learning to trust. She worked with the horses every day, Hades following her around like an enormous shadow. The stallion had finally allowed her to ride him across the open prairie, and the feeling of that much power beneath her, controlled but not broken, made her understand why some people believed in freedom even when it seemed impossible. Sam had started bringing his own troubled horses to her, animals other ranch hands had given up on. She fixed what she could, working patiently with each one until they remembered they were more than their fear. Some days it felt like she was healing herself through them. Other days it felt like she was just delaying the inevitable moment when everything fell apart again. "You're doing it again," Martha said one afternoon, finding Alara in the barn staring at nothing. "Doing what?" "Waiting for the other boot to drop, expecting disaster." Martha set down a basket of fresh bread and crossed her arms. "You're allowed to be happy, you know. It's not a trap." "Feels like one. That's because you've spent so long surviving that you forgot what living looks like." Martha's expression softened. "I know it's scary, but you can't spend the rest of your life preparing for the worst. Sometimes you just have to trust that good things can last." Alara wanted to believe her, but trust was still the hardest thing she'd ever tried to learn. 2 months after Lucien left, a letter arrived. Cade brought it to her while she was grooming Hades, his face unreadable. "This came in today's mail delivery. It's addressed to you." Alara's heart stopped. She stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Who's it from?" "No return address. But the postmark says St. Louis." Her hand shook as she took it. For a long moment she just held it, trying to decide if opening it would break the fragile peace she'd built, or finally give her the closure she needed. "You want me to stay?" Cade asked quietly. "Please." She tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper covered in precise, elegant handwriting she recognized immediately. The letter was short. "Alara, I have decided to release my legal claim as your guardian. The necessary documents have been filed with the courts in St. Louis, and you are now free of any obligation to me. Consider this a gift, though we both know you didn't earn it through gratitude or grace. You humiliated me, cost me the respect of men whose opinions I valued. For that, I should destroy you. But I find I've lost interest in the effort. You were always more trouble than you were worth, and I have better things to do than chase a woman who refuses to understand her own value. Live your small life on your frontier ranch. Marry your rancher if he's foolish enough to have you. It doesn't matter. You'll always know that everything you are, every ounce of strength you think you possess, exists because I allowed it to. I gave you shelter when you had nothing. I fed you, clothed you, tried to make you into something worthy. And this is how you repay me. Don't contact me again. Don't return to St. Louis. If I see you anywhere near my properties or business interests, I will have you arrested for trespassing and theft. You took clothing and personal items when you left. That alone is grounds for criminal charges. Consider yourself warned. Consider yourself forgotten. LV. Alara read the letter twice, then handed it to Cade without a word. He read it silently, his expression darkening with each line. "What a piece of shit," he said finally. "He let me go." "He didn't let you go. You took your freedom, and he's spinning it so he doesn't look weak." Cade crumpled the letter in his fist. "Don't let him rewrite what happened. You beat him. You won." "Then why doesn't it feel like winning?" "Because he's still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make you believe you're nothing without him." Cade grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "But you know the truth. You fixed a fence in a storm. You calmed a horse no one else could reach. You stood up to a man who'd controlled you for years and broke his nose. That's who you are, Alara, not the broken girl he tried to make you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm so tired of being angry." "Then be tired. Be angry. Be whatever you need to be." He pulled her close, his voice rough. "But don't let him take this away from you. Don't let him convince you that your freedom was his gift instead of something you fought for." Alara buried her face in his chest and let herself cry. Not from sadness or fear, but from the sheer exhaustion of carrying the weight of someone else's cruelty for so long. When the tears finally stopped, she pulled back and looked at the crumpled letter in Cade's hand. "Burn it," she said. "You sure?" "I'm sure. I don't need his permission to be free. I don't need his validation or his forgiveness or any part of him in my life." She took the letter from Cade's hand and walked to the small stove in the tack room. She dropped it into the flames and watched it curl and blacken and disappear into ash. "There," she said quietly. "Now it's done." Cab. Fall came to Iron Ridge with gold leaves and crisp mornings and the knowledge that another winter was approaching. The ranch prepared for the seasonal shift. Cattle moved to winter pastures, supplies stockpiled, repairs made to buildings that would need to withstand months of harsh weather. Alara threw herself into the work with a ferocity that surprised even her. She was no longer the half-dead drifter who'd stumbled onto the ranch in a storm. She was stronger now, capable, someone the other hands came to with questions instead of suspicion. "You ever think about what comes next?" Sam asked one afternoon as they hauled feed to the winter storage shed. "Next how? Like long term? You gonna stay here forever? Get married? Have kids?" He grinned. "I mean, everyone knows you and the boss are—" "Don't finish that sentence," Alara warned. "I'm just saying, you've been here 6 months now. That's longer than most people last. And the way he looks at you—" Sam shook his head. "I've never seen him like that with anyone, not even his wife." Alara's chest tightened. "That's not something I think about." "Why not?" "Because thinking about the future feels like tempting fate." Sam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My pa used to say that the difference between surviving and living is whether you're willing to bet on tomorrow. Survivors just try to make it through the day. But living means believing there's going to be a next day, and a day after that, and planning for it even when it scares you." "Your pa sounds smart." "He was. Died when I was 14. Sam's voice went soft. "But before he did, he told me not to waste my life being afraid of losing things. He said the point wasn't to avoid pain. It was to love people so much that the pain was worth it." Alara stopped walking. "I don't know if I'm brave enough for that. You stood up to a man who'd controlled you for years. You faced down gunfire to protect people you care about. If that's not brave, I don't know what is." Sam grinned. "Besides, Cade's not going to wait forever. Eventually he's going to ask, and you're going to have to decide if you're willing to bet on tomorrow." The question came on a cold November evening when frost sparkled on the grass and the stars looked close enough to touch. Alara was in the barn with Hades, singing that wordless lullaby while she brushed his coat. The stallion had his eyes half closed, completely relaxed, a different creature from the terrified animal she'd met 6 months ago. Cade appeared in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the lamplight from the house. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." He stepped into the stall, and Hades barely acknowledged him. The horse had learned to trust Cade's presence the same way Alara had. Slowly, carefully, with the understanding that trust was earned, not demanded. "I've been thinking," Cade said, leaning against the wall, "about what you said that first week, about not knowing if you could stay." Alara's hand stilled on the brush. "I remember. You've been here half a year now, longer than I expected. Longer than you expected, probably." He paused. "And I need to know if you're planning to stay permanent, or if this is just temporary until you figure out where you really want to be." "Why do you need to know?" "Because I'm tired of holding back." Cade pushed off the wall and crossed the distance between them. "I'm tired of pretending this is just about work, or safety, or convenience. I'm tired of loving you and not knowing if you're going to be here tomorrow, or next month, or next year." Alara's throat closed up. "Cade, let me finish." His voice was rough, almost angry. "I know I'm not easy to live with. I know I'm hard and closed off, and probably not what you'd choose if you had better options. But I love you, Alara, and I want to build a life with you, not just exist side by side, actually build something that matters." "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible and terrifying. Alara's first instinct was to run, to make excuses about why it was too soon, too dangerous, too much. But then she looked at Cade's face, at the vulnerability he was showing her despite every instinct telling him to protect himself, and she realized something. Running had never made her safe, it had just made her alone. "I'm broken," she said quietly. "I have nightmares. I flinch when people move too fast. I don't know how to be a wife or a partner or anything except scared." "I don't care. I might never be the person you want me to be." "You already are." Cade took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for you. Exactly as you are right now, scared and scarred and still fighting to believe you deserve good things. That's who I want to marry." "Why?" "Because you make me want to be better. Because you see the worst parts of me and don't run. Because when I look at you, I see someone who survived hell and came out the other side still capable of kindness." His voice dropped. "And because I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been if I'd been brave enough to ask." Alara's vision blurred with tears. "I don't have a ring to give you back." "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes." Cade pulled her into his arms so hard it knocked the breath from her lungs. She felt him shaking. This hard, brutal man who never showed weakness was shaking because she'd said yes. "I'm going to mess this up," she whispered against his chest. "So will I. I'm going to be difficult and impossible and probably drive you crazy." "Good. I'd be bored otherwise." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "We'll figure it out as we go. Together." "Together," Alara repeated, testing the word. It still felt foreign, dangerous. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the bravest thing she could do was let herself have something good and trust it wouldn't be taken away. Cade kissed her then, deep and thorough, and full of promises neither of them knew how to keep yet. But they'd learn. They had time. Aussi. They were married in the spring, when the prairie turned green and wildflowers covered the hills in waves of color. It wasn't a big ceremony, just Martha, Sam, Pike, Monroe, and a handful of other ranch hands standing in front of the house while a traveling preacher said words that made everything official. Alara wore a simple dress Martha had sewn, her hair loose around her shoulders, her hands shaking as Cade slid a plain gold band onto her finger. "You're stuck with me now," he murmured. "Good," she said. "I'm tired of running anyway." The celebration afterward was loud and chaotic, with food and music and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Alara danced with Sam, with Pike, with every ranch hand who asked, and each time she felt a little more like she belonged here, like this life was actually hers. Late in the evening, she slipped away to the barn to check on Hades. The stallion nickered softly when she entered, pressing his nose against her chest in greeting. "We did it," she told him, running her hand down his neck. "We survived." "Talking to the horse again?" She turned to find Cade in the doorway, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his tie long since discarded. He looked exhausted and happy in equal measure. "Just thanking him," Alara said. "If he hadn't let me get close that first day, I wouldn't be here. If you hadn't been brave enough to try, neither would I." Cade crossed the barn and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You ready to start our life together?" "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I'm willing to try." That's all I'm asking. They stood there in the quiet barn, holding each other while the sounds of celebration drifted in from outside. And for the first time in her life, Alara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found a place where the storm couldn't reach her. The years that followed weren't easy. They were messy and complicated and full of the kind of fights that happen when two damaged people try to build something whole. Alara still had nightmares, still flinched when men raised their voices, still sometimes woke in the middle of the night convinced that Lucian was standing at the foot of her bed, come to drag her back to St. Louis. But Cade was always there, always patient, even when she pushed him away, always steady, even when she tried to run. He learned which silences meant she needed space and which meant she needed holding. He learned to read her moods like weather patterns, knowing when to push and when to let her work through things alone. And slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, Alara learned to trust that he wouldn't leave. Learned to believe that his love wasn't conditional on her being perfect or healed or anything except herself. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Alara's skill with horses became legendary in the territory, and people traveled for days to have her work with their troubled animals. Cade expanded the operation, buying more land, hiring more hands, building Iron Ridge into something that would last long after they were gone. Sam got married to a girl from Ridgemont and built a house on the eastern edge of the property. Pike retired but refused to leave, spending his days teaching younger hands the skills he'd learned over a lifetime of hard work. Martha ruled the house with an iron fist and more love than she'd admit to, treating Alara like the daughter she'd never had. And Hades, the wild black stallion who'd been too broken to save, became the foundation stud for a breeding program that produced some of the finest horses in 3 territories. He lived to be 26 years old, spending his final years in a sunny pasture where children came to feed him apples and hear the story of the starving drifter who'd saved him by refusing to give up. On the day they buried him, a clear autumn morning, not unlike the one when Alara had first arrived, she stood by his grave and sang that wordless lullaby one last time. "You saved me too," she whispered. "I hope you knew that." Cade's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together with the ease of long practice. He knew. They always know. Years later, when Alara was well into her 60s and Cade's hair had gone fully silver, a young woman appeared at the ranch. She was thin and exhausted, her clothes threadbare, her eyes holding the kind of fear that came from months of running. Alara met her at the gate, remembering another storm, another desperate moment, another fence that had needed fixing. "I'm looking for work," the woman said, her voice barely audible. "I can do anything. Clean, cook, work with animals. I just need—" Her voice broke. "I just need somewhere safe." Alara studied her for a long moment, seeing herself in every line of the woman's face. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Sarah." "Well, Sarah, I think we can find something for you to do." Alara opened the gate. "Come on in. Let's get you some food first, then we'll talk about work." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." "I do, actually," Alara smiled. "I know exactly what it means." She led Sarah toward the house, and as they walked, she told her the story of a broken fence in a storm, and a horse everyone thought was too damaged to save, and a man who taught her that love wasn't about being perfect, it was about being willing to try. "The world is full of people who want you to believe you're worthless," Alara said as they reached the porch. "But they're wrong. And if you stay here long enough, you might just start believing that too." Sarah looked at her with something close to hope. "How long did it take you?" Alara thought about it, about the years of nightmares and setbacks and moments when she'd wanted to run, about the slow, painful work of learning to trust, about Cade's patience and Martha's kindness, and the way a community had formed around her without her even noticing. "I'm still learning," she admitted, "but that's okay. The point isn't to be healed. The point is to keep trying." Basic. On her last evening, years later, when her body was worn down and her time was running short, Alara sat on the porch with Cade and watched the sun set over the prairie. "You think we did all right?" she asked. "With what?" "Everything. The ranch, each other, the life we built." Cade's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together with the muscle memory of decades. "I think we did better than all right. I think we took two broken people and made something whole. We're still broken. Maybe, but we're broken together, and that makes all the difference. Elara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. I'm glad I fixed that fence. So am I. I'm glad I stayed. So am I. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. And Elara thought about the scared girl who'd stumbled onto this ranch years ago, convinced she was worthless and unlovable and destined to die alone. That girl had been wrong about a lot of things. She'd been wrong about her value, wrong about her strength, wrong about whether anyone would ever fight for her when things got hard. But most importantly, she'd been wrong about love. Love wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being healed or whole or having your life together. Love was about finding someone willing to stand beside you while you figured it out. Someone who saw your worst moments and chose to stay anyway. Someone who believed you were worth fighting for even when you couldn't believe it yourself. Elara had spent years running from shadows, convinced that safety meant being alone. But she'd learned something more important on this ranch, in this life, with this man beside her. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running. Sometimes courage means letting yourself be loved. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, you find a place where broken things aren't thrown away. They're mended piece by piece with patience and care and the quiet understanding that healing takes time. Iron Ridge Ranch had given her that. Cade had given her that. And in return, she'd given them everything she had. Her work, her loyalty, her love, and eventually, her trust. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The sun finally dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. And as darkness settled over the prairie, Elara Quinn Mercer, once a starving drifter with nothing to her name, closed her eyes and smiled. She'd found her way home. And after all those years of running, that was the greatest victory of all.